In episode 7, I made a bunch of 1-inch cubes out of XPS foam for my tabletop terrain for the City of Whispers, Osma. Afterwards, I had some leftovers, so I cut them in half. Some half-inch tall pieces could act as steps, connecting low and high terrain. I've hot-glued magnets to the tops and bottoms, with different polarities facing out. They're a little plain like this, so let's add some details. I've 3D printed some little mechanical greeblies from Miscast and some other creators. So I cut out little notches and gaps for them to fit into. I generally don't want these pieces to extend past 1 by 1 by 1/2 inch, because these are going to be part of my modular terrain system, which means they'll get rearranged and stuck together in a variety of combinations, and having parts stick out limits my ability to do that. I still have things stick out sometimes, but I try to do it sparingly. I'm also using some epoxy putty I've formed into various shapes for extra details. I printed a few other little things that I'll be using as scatter, like this little cactus, which gets a magnet, a stump, barrels, crates, they all get magnets too. The magnets keep these little pieces from getting knocked around too much during play. When you build tabletop terrain like this, you wind up with lots of scraps and offcuts. So I've gathered some and cut them down into ramps and various other shapes that seem like they'd be useful when laying out a table. I stick some more 3D printed details in them and cut slits to make them look like they're built from stone. Then I trace a pen along the cuts to widen them. Here's a really small ramp that'll get a grate. I make an impression with the grate, then dig out some foam to make room for it. And in it goes. While I make some more small things, here's a small story about small things in that ancient and terrible city, Osma. The cat knew the people of its territory had names for it, but it had no use for such things. The cat understood that people, preoccupied with language as they are, felt a need to name everything they encountered, to wrap them in shrouds of definition and category that smooth out their irregularities, soften their sharp edges, so that they may safely bat and bandy them about, playing at power and control. The cat loved to play too, but this, a waste of energy, a self-delusion. So many of the people, the bigger, older ones in particular, acted as if their manipulation of names granted them some sort of power, that the names could somehow feed back into the world and overpower those things they signified. Rubbish. The cat knew where power lay. Action. Prowling, patrolling, surveying, marking, hunting. Tooth and claw. Back to that in a minute. But first, magnets. All of these pieces get magnets in the same orientation as all the rest of my terrain. I don't really know which is north or south, but it doesn't really matter as long as I'm consistent. My modular terrain system is very simple. It's a 1-inch grid in all 3 axes. Every inch can have a magnet, dead center. If the magnet's facing down, I use this red magnet applicator. And if it's up, I use the blue one. The applicators are magnetized with opposite polarities. If it's sideways, it alternates, red-blue, red-blue. This way, most things have a defined up and down, but can rotate around the vertical axis. Also, to save money, in less critical places I use nails, tacks, and other bits of ferrous metal in place of magnets. For a more in-depth explanation of this system, have a look at my City Tiles video. Once the magnets are in, I apply various pastes to the pieces. I have 3 main pastes I use for this. Paste 1 is spackle. It's light, dries hard, has a bit of gritty texture, and is easy to work with. You can get it at any hardware store. Paste 2 is acrylic modeling paste. You can get it at art supply stores. It's denser and tougher, great for when you need something more structural. And paste 3 is grout. Again, any hardware store. It's gritty and can be kind of crumbly. Not structural, but great for adding texture. Okay, back to the cat story. The cat stalked another of its kind. It had slunk in from a neighboring territory that stank of old death. It had come to raid the bowls the people had set out. The bowls, the food, the milk, the neighborhood was all for the cat, not this interloper. Not because anyone said so, but because the cat made it so. Screeches, yowls, tufts of bloody fur, a sneak attack, a frenzy of violence. The territory is defined by its maintenance. Action shapes the world. The people who put out the bowls, who scratch the cat behind the ears, call it some name or another, they may let themselves be bound by names. But the cat's territory is bound by blood. The other limped back whence it came, but it had been quick, and its belly was full, and the bowls were empty. The cat licked its wounds, feeling hunger pangs and scanning the cluttered alley for the furtive movements of some small thing it could make its next meal, with tooth and claw. Back to the build for a minute. I like making rocks out of cork. Just tear up a cork from a wine bottle into little chunks, and they make very nice rocks and rubble. I mostly stick them in corners where it makes sense for rubble to accumulate, and around the bottoms of pieces to help them blend into their surroundings. And I just stick them on with PVA glue. Easy. I also use PVA glue, usually watered down a little bit, to stick flocking to the pieces. This stuff is from Woodland Scenics and is made for miniatures, but I've also used sawdust and coffee grounds for this. Most people apply flock after painting and just use whatever color the flock is, but I do it before because I like to have control over the color. And now a few more 3D printed bits. Stray cats. Visiting cities in certain parts of the world, like Greece and Turkey, you'll encounter hundreds, thousands of stray cats. In many of these places, the cats aren't exactly strays. People in the neighborhoods take care of them, leave food out for them. Kind of like communal pets. Osma is the same way. Now, if you watch enough of this kind of video, you'll recognize these. The universal Greebly. Basically every spaceship miniature from Star Wars has a bunch of these on it. It's originally from some old military model kit, but that's not very accessible these days, so 3D printing to the rescue. Also, you can print them in different sizes, which is great. Okay, so at this point, the pieces are mostly done. Their main forms are built, they've been magnetized and gooped. All that's left is to fill them out with some more details. With pretty much all of these builds, you'll see the same pattern play out. I start with the big broad strokes, in this case sticking the chunks of foam together, and gradually refine, like by carving them, adding texture, and so on, until I get down to small specific details, like this bit of lichen, cork rubble, and pack of beer. This is generally a good strategy with lots of creative projects, and it's something beginners tend to miss. Like when you think of a character you want to draw, maybe you're thinking of them making a particular facial expression or having eyes that look a certain way, so you start by drawing that. Eyes or a face, floating in space, connected to nothing, relating to nothing. And you work outward from there, tacking on the rest of the body, and the body winds up looking like it's floating, hanging from the face. And it just doesn't look right. It's not what you'd hoped. This is why more experienced character artists often start with a silhouette or gesture, looking at the broad strokes that define the entire character, and refining, getting more detailed from there, working inwards. Anyway, here I take some Mod Podge mixed with water and black paint, and coat all the pieces. This seals in all the goops and flock and cork and things and protects them. It helps maintain the integrity of the pieces, and as a bonus, it serves as a coat of primer. As I mentioned in the magnet section, these pieces all have a top and bottom, which means they'll generally be brighter on top and darker on the bottom. So I can use my airbrush to spray on some light gray primer and kind of bake in that lighting, and just create some random tonal variation to build on. Miniature painters call this technique of spraying a lighter color on from above zenithal highlighting. The idea is to replicate how sunlight hits the piece to aid in painting shadows and highlights. This is useful, but for me the main benefit is really these nice, soft, semi-random light and dark transitions. I find that for painting things to look like stone, this is especially helpful. Just look at a rock. get it wet first, and you'll see all kinds of colors and values in there in seemingly random distributions. So this is a nice way of starting off the painting with some value shifts we can build on. The primary stone you'll see in Osma construction is limestone, which tends to be a bit lighter and warmer than the stone you see in a lot of tabletop terrain. Looking at real-world examples, I developed a color palette for the stone that uses a light flesh tone as a base with some hints of orange. It darkens into warm, purpley-brown shadows and gets paler and cooler in the highlights, at times showing hints of a light azure blue. Have a look at the first Paradiso Craft episode for a more in-depth look at the color palette and specific paints, most of which come from the Vallejo Basic Colors USA set. For the base coats, I hit everything with that flesh tone, and then go into cracks, recesses, and lower areas with a mix of purple and brown. And I give the tops a light dusting of white and blue. So while I do that, back to the story. The cat had the little morsel cornered and hungrily drank in the smell of its terror. A desert mouse that had come into the city in some crate of grain, hopelessly lost in this alien place, now bristling and baring its little teeth. Adrenaline shaking, limping from the deep slashes across its haunch. It was already over for this little beast, but there was still some fight in it. Experience told the cat to be cautious here. It was best to let the morsel bleed, wear itself out, shaking, darting ever more weakly. But also, it was an opportunity for some fun. The cat batted at the desert mouse, knocking it into the stone wall. Hunting makes the hunter, fleeing makes the prey. Violence and fear make power. The mouse tries to dash away, but it's lost blood, it's dazed and tired. The cat easily catches a claw on its side and tosses it, weakly shrieking, back into the corner, and watches with satisfaction as the fight finally drains out of the little beast. Now it's real, because it exists between them. The understanding. This is the way it is. This is the way it's going to be. The cat's will is manifest as it leans down to the exhausted mouse and gently bites into the back of its neck as if it were its own kitten. The cat saunters with the limp creature back to a favorite windowsill where it can kill and eat and watch the people pass by, calling each other by their nonsense names and weaving those silly, complex stories they love to trap themselves in. Their murmur is a comfort to the cat. It doesn't understand it, and nor does it care to. Their babble is a sign that things are well. A new bowl of tripe will be set out tomorrow. The cat will eat and make its territory by prowling, by tooth and claw. Back to the build. Okay, I've done those stone base coats a bunch of times, so I want to get into these scatter objects to mix it up a little. These are mostly meant to be wood, so I'll start with a base coat of brown and a dark green for the flora. And shifting here into Warcolours' recreation of the classic Goblin Green from 90s Games Workshop paints, I'm applying this a little lighter so it stays on the surface and lets the dark green peek through the crevices. And I apply progressively lighter browns and tans to pick out ridges and raised areas and accentuate the wood grain. And while I do that, if you're enjoying the video, toss it a like, subscribe, leave a comment. I love hearing from you. And while you do that, I'd like to thank all the lovely folks who support my work, both the videos on this channel and my RPG writing and game design. You can join my site, paradiso.zone, and get my free newsletter to keep up with all the stuff I make. And if you can swing it, you can become a paid member, support my work, and get lots of nice rewards, like the RPG books I've written, the RPG audio app I've made, a discount at my shop, your name in these video credits, and more. You can also become a channel member right here on YouTube and get early access to videos like this and some members-only videos. If subscriptions aren't for you, but buying a weird digital sci-fi book sounds appealing, you can go to paradiso.000/100 to get Hundreds, my now platinum best-selling book of tables for Mothership and other sci-fi RPGs. And if physical goods are more your thing, You can go to my shop at paradiso.works and grab a copy of my mothership module, Warped Beyond Recognition, and the sick patch that goes with it. And if the promise of a really weird and insane-looking fantasy mega dungeon tickles your fancy, you can pre-order the Blades of Gixa at paradiso.oo/Gixa. Check out my Dungeon 23 videos for more info about that. Okay, that's enough hawking wares, let's get back to it. Painting a lovely little red cable here, and a gold beer stein. I think we can guess what's in those barrels. And this lovely flower atop the cactus looks nice and pink. And I mix in some yellow to get these lovely ridges, and then some white highlights on the petals. I brighten up the moss with some more yellow-green, with a lighter touch for each progressive layer. And a little pink highlight on the cable. Time for an oil wash to darken the crevices and make the colors a little deeper and richer. This is just burnt umber oil paint, heavily thinned with mineral spirits. I slather it all over the pieces without much regard for where it goes. The nice thing about oil paint is that it takes a very long time to dry, which means you can keep working with it for quite a while after you apply it. It darkens the pieces pretty significantly, but not to worry, because next we use the oil paint's superpower of long dry time. Once all the pieces are oiled up, I go back over all of them with a rag and wipe away any excess paint. By letting the pieces sit for a bit, the paint gets a little time to dry and settle in, but not enough that I can't wipe it away off the more prominent areas. And if a little too much of it is staying on, I just dip the rag in mineral spirits before wiping. That cleans it up pretty quick. This next bit is a fun technique for getting some highlights on stone, as it also creates a lovely mottled texture which can really help sell the stone effect. I dip a sponge in my highlight color, which I vary depending on where I'm putting it, but it's generally a blend of flesh, white, and azure blue. I gently dab it on around corners, edges, the tops of pieces, anywhere I want to be a little lighter. This contributes to the sense of light and shadow on the pieces and introduces some lovely color variation. And if I get a little too much on there, I use my finger or a clean bit of sponge to wipe it off. This is a pretty loose, messy step, but it's also quite fun and expressive. Next, I have all these greeblies and things that I've glued on that I'm going to paint as metal, so I base coat them black to prep for that. Metallic paint looks quite nice over a black base. And while we're doing the dark stuff, this is a good time to get into the deep cracks with some dark paints. Here I'm using a black, brown, and purple mix. And as with the lighter paint I applied with the sponge, I adjust the mix based on where I'm applying it. I don't want to overdo the contrast, or conversely, paint a color that's too similar to what's around it. I generally go a bit lighter for shallow surface cracks than the deep crevices between stones. I'm tracing the shapes I've made intentionally, but I'm also picking out some of the little contours and edges of the pastes I've smeared on them, and places where the paint color transitions in an interesting way. In some places, seams between parts of the piece have been entirely filled in, and I just freehand cracks right across the surface to bring them back. Next is edge highlights. This is exactly what it sounds like, highlighting the edges of each piece. You can achieve a similar effect more quickly by dry brushing a highlight color all over them, but I like the control I get by painting the highlights in more deliberately, even if it is quite slow. The edge highlighting step is where you can really accentuate certain shapes and features of each piece. And while the edge highlight is always the brightest part of a piece, as with the previous steps, I'm adjusting my color mixture based on where I'm painting. For example, if I'm highlighting an area with some greenery, I'll mix some green into the highlight to match. In a lot of places with more prominent edges, you can get a great highlight just by dragging the side of your brush along them. Don't use a nice brush if you do that though. Okay, while I get all these pieces highlit, let's finish the story. As night fell and the air cooled, the cat tucked its paws beneath its body and its ears perked up. Something was different in the sound of its territory. Usually becoming boisterous, boosted by drink and hot food at this hour, was strangely subdued, hushed. And then a deafening shriek startled the cat, sending it diving into the crates and barrels piled high along the side of the building, just as a group of unfamiliar people ran by with a cacophonous clanging. Shouts, more screams, crashing, crunching, something shiny glinting in the tangerine glow of the sun's descent. A long claw plunging into a body, spilling blood in steaming gouts. Gurgles, sobs, smoke, and the crackling of flame. The cat wandered its streets, watching, listening, puzzled and curious at the transformation. It had at times seen violence among the people, but always quick, isolated, sporadic. And they would soon after return to their talk. But this was different. The people had set aside their pointless babbling and taken up tooth and claw. The cat patrolled that night as it always did, listening and watching as the people of its territory prowled, cowered, and scampered, smelling of terror and adrenaline like cornered desert mice. In the morning, the cat made its territory by prowling, picking its way between new fires and barricades and bodies, and finding that the bowls were still empty. Days passed. Nobody called the cat by any of those old names, and still the bowls lay forgotten. Some of the strange-smelling newcomers did shout and kick at the cat, even swiped at it with their blades, and it soon learned to avoid them entirely. One day, it found the cat that it fought some days ago. It had returned to its territory, but there was nothing to be done about it. It lay in the street, dead, an arrow through its gut. Strange people had come to the cat's territory and remade it, bent it to their will. They hoarded the food, they toyed with the locals, and nobody remembered to fill the bowls. Except weeks later, for one small person who saw the cat watching as she ate in the alley, and she whispered to it one of those names had been given, and lay on the ground a piece of fish. The cat approached, cautiously, and took the fish in its mouth, and let the young person call it by that name and scratch it behind the ears. In a rare moment, a person and a cat shared a thought, a yearning for the time when people could wrap themselves in their webs of names and stories and intrigue, and, swaddled in their obfuscating shrouds, forget all about the ways of tooth and claw. And that's our story. Okay, now for metal. Some people can produce really gorgeous metallic effects without using metallic paint. I've played around with this a little. You can see some of it in the first Paradiso Craft video about the stairs. But for these pieces, I want to keep it simple and just stick with the metallics. I use silver paint mixed with a bit of black for these little details and accents, and all the little doodads and greeblies I stuck on the pieces. Like all these universal greebs in the various sizes I printed them. For things like grating and vents, I just try to keep the silver paint a bit on the dry side to prevent it from seeping into the cracks. I want to keep those black for contrast. And all this metal is just sitting around outdoors, so of course it's going to get a bit rusty. To create a rust effect, I just use some thinned down orange and brown paint, which I mostly splotch on randomly and then wipe off the excess. Or I apply it in streaks, thinking about where water would flow and carry the rust and stain the surrounding areas. Little bursts of accent color really help make these pieces come alive, like some chipping red paint on the handle of this wheel, or some hazard stripes on this hatch, or some white and black for these stray cats. I'll paint the 6-pack case in green, and the bottles in brown, a darker turquoise wash to pop the details on the case, and a touch of tan to highlight the tops of the bottles. These cables get a random assortment of colors and metallics, and I use some pure silver to highlight the edges of the metal parts. A bit of orange to highlight the wheel, some yellow and gray highlights for the hazard stripe hatch handle, and some more bold rust streaks coming down. Why not? Now, all this flock, coffee grounds, and whatnot will become moss, grass, and lichen, the ever-expanding blanket of green, always creeping and consuming the city. This is quite simple, just starting from a dark green and gradually brushing on lighter and lighter layers by mixing in more bright greens and yellow, just like I did before with the stump and cactus. And actually, I want to revisit the cactus. I'm being a little more precise here, accentuating just the ridges and spines. For the crates and barrels, I use some tan highlighting to really bring out the wood grain and help them feel textured and worn. This is a mix of some edge highlighting and just freehanding some strokes here and there to really pick out the board's texture. Okay, so at this point, the pieces are pretty much done, so I use a few layers of varnish to protect them. As with my previous pieces, I start with a tough gloss varnish, then go over it all with a very matte varnish, except in some areas that I might want to look wet. Alright, and when the varnish dries, we have our set of little objects. These beauty shots are taken atop a little plinth of cubes from the previous 1-inch cube terrain video, which is on my little airbrushing turntable that I'm turning with my cordless drill with a rubber rotary tool mandrel in it, and a clamp on the trigger to keep it moving at a constant speed. And that's movie magic. There are quite a few of these, so while I'm showing them off to you, let me tell you one last way you can support my work. If you're interested in making a website and or newsletter and or paid subscription thing like what I've built at paradiso.zone, and you don't want to use a service backed by venture capital vampires who will gradually hollow it out into a wealth extraction and disenfranchisement machine, then you should try out Ghost using my affiliate link, paradiso.ooo/ghost. Ghost is a great open source yet very user-friendly tool for running a website, blog, and or newsletter, and it handles accounts and subscriptions and manages payments via Stripe. It's great, it's what I use, it makes everything very straightforward. You actually get to own your own data, it's run by a nonprofit, it's not venture-backed or anything, and you can even self-host it if you want to. But if you go to paradiso.ooo/ghost and sign up for their paid hosting service, I get a cut of what you pay them at no extra cost to you. And you can join the likes of, well, me, but also prominent and respected outlets like 404, Platformer, and Scope of Work in this weird, independent media world. And doesn't that sound nice? Anyway. Dang, I made a lot of little things, huh? And here I thought this would be a short video. Well, I guess compared to some of the feature-length stuff I've been putting out, it is short, but still. All these projects seem to have a way of getting away from me a little bit. Tall boy. And alright, that's the last one. So now let's have a look at them in context with the other parts of this terrain system, the tiles, stairs, and cubes, which all fit together magnetically on this 1-inch grid. It can get pretty dense and cluttered if you let it. But all these objects are just tools for building layouts and landscapes. And it's really fun to make them. Here's another one. Okay, last one, I swear. It's kind of like playing with Legos. Hi, kitty. And let's add in some devourers for scale. Okay, kind of a lot going on here. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. You're the best. Be well, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.